Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Before we introduce our next guest, today's question comes from a former teammate of mine, Matt Medvez. Matty, I hope you're doing well. Life's treating you well, and I miss you, buddy. His question: youth development, the long-term process over short-term success, both the mental and physical sides, including parents' expectation. Well, that's a lot to chew on, Matt. I don't know if I have a perfect answer for you, but it all comes back to me about education, education, education. I think from an organizational standpoint, whether you're dealing with a large organization with multiple teams, I think parents' meetings are mandatory at the start of the year to outline those, your core values, your philosophy, your game principles, your shared terminology, and your development pathways. I think when you educate parents and set expectations, it can be a lot smoother in terms of a process for expectations. On the micro side, speaking from experience, my brother Matt and I coach a 10U team in Columbus. Matt has taken it upon himself to create a quote-unquote flight manual. And in that, he outlines exactly what we speak about, which are, again, your mission statement, your coaching philosophy, your game principles, and your shared terminology. And again, I think this puts parents and players on the same page. It's never a perfect science, but in my opinion, education is the key. I view this development specifically from youth 6U, 8U, all the way down to 18U. It is a long-term, slow-baked process, not a microwave process. At a young age, play multiple sports and have a lot of fun. Until the age where you essentially have to play a single sport, do as much as you can and play as many activities as you can. I'm a firm believer in doing your best to try to keep the off and off season for young athletes. So education, and it can come from the organization, it can come from the coaches, it can come from former players. But that, I believe, will help. Never perfect, but that will help in terms of changing the mindset of parents. Thanks for the question, Matt. Today's guest actually parlays right into our question, which is involving a lot of long-term athletic development. Today's guest is Mark Fitzgerald. Mark has spent the last 15 years working with athletes from a variety of sports at every level. He began his coaching career with the Toronto Maple Leafs organization and most recently the head of performance for the Anaheim Ducks. Mark is the founder of Elite Training Systems in Ontario, has 4 locations, also serves as a consultant for a number of health and performance organizations. Currently, Mark serves as a member of the Under Armour training team. His role is to build out high-performance training initiatives in the brand. He also currently serves as a coach for Kelowna High Performance. So really, really educationally packed hour and 20 some odd minutes. We talk about reflection and contemplation, Mark's career, but the majority of the conversation is about youth hockey, pitfalls, the current state of affairs, this idea of the more is better mentality, developing athletes, keeping the off and off season. Hopefully, this reaches the ears of a lot of hockey parents. It was a really fun conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Fitzy. Thanks so much for joining us, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to chatting.
It's going to be awesome, man. Seasoned veteran in the trade and going to share a lot of great information, as I'm sure. Let's start with the listeners. Your current appointment, man, God's country. We're speaking about that off air. Kelowna, been there one time, one of the most beautiful places I've ever had the chance to step 2 feet in. How'd you wind up in your current appointment?
Yeah, it's I'm originally from Ontario, like we were chatting about, and after we were done in Anaheim, we took the Anaheim thing as an adventure for our family. At the time we had 3 kids under 3, and I said to my wife, if we don't do this now, it just gets harder. It just gets harder to pack up the kids and go. And so let's look at it as an adventure. And she was on board, as she always is. And it was fun, and that's kind of how we looked at it. And then when my time was over in Anaheim, it was okay. Now what? And we had some buffer time. We spent an extra year in California, which was great. Kids are playing sports, making friends, obviously. And I thought about staying there and realized that the cost of living is just ridiculous. Um,
Yeah.
um, but we loved it there, right? Because that's, you start to form those friendships with kids playing sports and, what have you. And when it was time to think about leaving, Ontario, where I had ETS, we had a couple locations, and I just didn't feel like that was what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to go back, and maybe that was somewhat of ego as well. I don't know. I'm sure it was. But yeah, I just felt like, okay, let's go on another adventure. Let's try something because, I have the same friends since kindergarten, which I'm very grateful for. And, not very many of them live outside of our hometown, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's good, bad, indifferent. I'm just saying that's not the path that I want to go on. And I think it's also with our type of work, it's interesting when you leave your hometown, how much easier it is to attract business and, build a business.
I gotta pause you really quick. This is a quote I stole, and I used it on last podcast. I don't know if you feel this way, Fitzy, but I have in my older age. It's a Dan Paff quote. He said, "You're never the guru in your own area code."
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think I'm a guru, but you're right. It's so true because, when I was building ETS and I was working for the Leafs, it was me and Belza. So I was one of two people that, like, all these crazy hockey parents who were watching Hockey Night in Canada, like, I had responsibility over one of the teams on the ice. And it's like, I don't think I'm an arrogant guy. I don't, walk around with, hey, this is who I work for type stuff. But, I'd stand up there and I'd put on a Leafs golf shirt just to kind of like, hey, remember, like, this is what I do. Like, I think it's good enough for your 13, 14-year olds to, like, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It's because I was the local guy, and it's insane, right? So,
Yep.
I think when I went back to, hey, let's go on another adventure, it was, well, where can we go? And, realistically, I think in the US, strength and conditioning, our trade, our profession, whatever you want to call it, is just there's more opportunities there. There really is. And I think, yeah, we work in hockey and hockey in Canada. You go into downtown Toronto, there's a gym on every corner. But the US is a little bit different. So I was kind of contemplating, I had some interest from some other entities and, sports and, that I was entertaining, but nothing really felt right. I just spent, the past little while, like, going to every hockey practice with my son, pretty much everyone. And, just kind of being around, which I haven't, unfortunately, because of this type of job, I hadn't been around for a long time. It was kind of strange. So kind of getting used to that and enjoying that was like, okay, I know I can make money. I know I can make money doing what I'm doing. It's just a matter of, like, where do we want to set up home base? And, we, as I mentioned, I do some consulting with the Okanagan Hockey Group, and it's a big entity in Canada. They have academies basically, and they're situated. One is close by us here in Penticton, Edmonton, Alberta, Whitby, Ontario, which obviously my hometown, Denver, Colorado, Austria. So they're very growing company, and the head guy there is a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and he said to me, like, well, why don't you just move here and, maybe live in Kelowna? And I said, well, oh, I never really thought about that. And he offered me, a little bit bigger of a role and, some money that, obviously money's important, and making sure that we had a base of income and what have you. And he actually also said too, like, I bet you could start a new business out here, like an off-season business. I'm like, really? And just started investigating into that, and had some players who were clients of mine who were like, yeah, you definitely could. Like, I'll tell people, how it is in the hockey
Yep.
world,
Oh
it's
yeah.
word of mouth. And came out here a few times, and I was like, holy smokes, like, this is about as close to California as I'm going to get in Canada. So, as I look out my window, it's like mountains and water, and, it's pretty amazing. So, we were planning on moving in June of 2020, finish out the year in California, school year for the kids. And then obviously COVID happened, and that expedited our trip pretty a lot. And, going back, I don't know, it was just the unknown, right? As everybody, we don't need to talk about COVID, but the unknown of it was a little bit weird for me and with the kids, and then, just being in the US and not being a citizen and all that kind of stuff. So we left California in March of 2020 and we drove here. So it was about a 30-hour drive.
Jeez. That's a journey right there.
Yeah, yeah, it was we stopped a few times obviously and made it a trip, and kind of got here and waited for our house to be, ready to move in or whatever. And yeah, it was an interesting journey. I had basically had summer tires and I didn't think about any snow coming to Canada. That was a mistake. Almost ended our trip prematurely, but yeah, we got through it. And yeah, it's been amazing. We've been here for 4 years now, and the business that I opened here called Kelowna High Performance, I found a great business partner. That was something I wanted as well, like someone to work with, Travis Martell, who's a local guy, and he played a little bit, and just a phenomenal guy. We've become really close. Our families become really close, and it's yeah, it's been great, man. It's change is always tough, and especially with coming during COVID and all that kind of craziness, but it's yeah, it's turned out really well. I don't see us really leaving here, and I've had some offers to leave, as I guess my name still gets thrown around a little bit. I'm sure that's going to end at some point, but yeah, it just seems like this is home.
That's outstanding. I'm going to ask you more a little bit about the business, but I want to rewind a little bit. You've worked with the Oshawa Generals, you worked with the Marlies, and your most recent appointment before Kelowna was the Anaheim Ducks, right? Correct
Mm.
me if I'm wrong. You were there for 4 years, right?
Yep.
Walk us through. I always ask this for most of the strength and conditioning coaches in the National League, their first years. I'm always curious about the first year in an organization. Like it depends on, you're either replacing somebody, you're trying to create a culture. I would imagine for most, that year is probably, I don't want to say the toughest, but the most challenging. I remember talking to Matty Price, and he said, Anth, for me in LA, it was literally building a culture, and then, management, all they were focused on was body comp. So we had to get a gold standard for our body comp measure. Other strength and conditioning coaches were faced with different circumstances, ownership, etc. Walk me through your first year in Anaheim, and how did you build culture, and who did you rely on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think every team is so different and every organization is so different. I know for me, the part I wasn't worried about was the job, like being in the gym, coaching. That I was like, yep, I'm ready. I spent 8 years with Leafs and Marlies, so I was used to, I worked with Anthony Belza, who was amazing, and it kind of just like let me in on everything. It was just him and I basically. And I'd be done with the Marlies. I'd run over and help him out with the Leafs. And so I got to kind of experience all that. So I knew the dynamics, or at least I knew the dynamics of the room, not necessarily the people, as they're all a little bit different. But that part I was good with. But, first and foremost, it was replacing a guy that I had a ton of respect for. And I actually called Sean Skane and said, like, what the hell's going on? Like, why am I getting a phone call? Like, I was just so like taken aback by the fact that he was gone. I'm like, wait a second. So he was, I don't know if I'd be this gracious if it was the other way around, but he was amazing. He gave me the goods, and probably not very many people know that, but he talked to me about it, and he said, hey, do that, this is how it is, da 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 da, and kind of gave me information that I probably wouldn't have been able to get otherwise, which I'm, extremely grateful for. I actually just did his podcast not that long ago, so it was cool to chat with him.
Great. That's awesome.
So that was number one, as you mentioned, like trying to fill in with somebody who'd been there for so long and like won a cup and all that stuff, right? It's a hard thing to change. And I think really that first year was just about trying to establish, we call it a system, culture. I think all those things kind of get poured into one pot. But I knew I was really comfortable with the coaching side, and I knew that would kind of bleed into some of the other things. And, so I reached out to some of the players that I had connections with, and Corey Perry, Getzlaff, Bieksa, who are guys that are, guys I still talk to now, who are phenomenal guys, and just kind of tried to understand the room. Andrew Cogliano, another one who I still keep in touch with regularly. What am I coming into? What do you guys need? And I think I knew what the management wanted and I knew what the team was looking for the most part. But I think I did a good job at connecting with the players and saying, hey, like, what are you guys looking for? Where are the gaps? Where's this? Where's that? And, one of the first ones was just food, and, you know, oddly enough, we got to training camp. We have, 62 guys in camp. And I ran over to the team services guy. I'm like, oh, what's for lunch today? And he's like, oh, the guys just usually go down the street to get burritos. I'm like, we don't have a lunch like here? He's like, no, do you think we should? I'm like, yeah. Yeah, we should, man. Like these guys are like hammering themselves for 4 hours straight. Like we need to feed them. And he's like, oh yeah. Yeah, okay. So then I'm on the phone, like calling the burrito place saying, hey, I need 80 burritos. Like he's like, what? Like, so we made it happen. And then, I started to establish, I work with a guy at Whole Foods. And then we started to build out a team program and lunches and whatever. And, obviously that was a big win for me because for whatever reason, it wasn't done before that or wasn't done to that level. And again, when you're the new guy, you get away with a lot. So I'm not saying anything negatively about Sean. It was just, hey, the new guy wants to do this. So like they do it, right, for a certain amount of time. One of the other things was in our game rank, it's like, I go, where do the players eat breakfast? He's like, oh, we put the bagels and the muffins over there. It's like, well, if you want me to be responsible for body comp and weight, I go, we have to feed them properly. So we started a whole, nutrition program. And, we had one of the chefs from one of the restaurants in the building making our breakfast, omelet bar, all this stuff. And it's like, well, this is kind of just what you should have, and I got the comment a lot like, oh, it's not Toronto. We don't have Toronto money. And it's like, it's not about that. It's more about just like a level of reaching a standard or at least being at the standard. So I think, again, a lot of it was number one, the coaching is making sure that, you're addressing that, connecting with the players, and then kind of an easy win like food, and making sure that it's where it needs to be, right?
I think, not to interrupt you, but I think it's an important lesson for everybody, regardless of what sector you're in, if it's a private sector, professional sector. But, especially with young coaches nowadays, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, everyone's glamorized by technology and metrics and this and that. And it's like, I use the analogy all the time with our young interns. It's like picking up the quarters and picking up, and the steamroller's coming at you. The steamrollers are the low hanging fruit. It's the stuff that you got to be doing. It's your nutrition. It's your sleep. It's the stuff that's just, you would say common sense is not so common, but a lot of time we don't pick that low hanging fruit and we're worried about the shiny, flashy things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's true. And, like, again, I started to implement a sports science program, and I'm not a sports scientist, but I knew going in as a one-man show, like for the first couple of years, it was just me. And it was a very siloed organization where the medical people stayed over here, strength guy was here. Like it was very siloed. And I was trying to break those down, which was tough to do as a one-man job. And then sports science on top of it. So we had a force plates, which, at that time we were one of the few teams that did. And I didn't even know how to use them, so I had to bring someone in and like, okay, crunch all this data. Okay, 3 days later, we get our testing results. It's like, Jesus, there's got to be a better way. So, and then I'm, running out to the ice because we're doing, we had the Zephyr system. We were monitoring on ice, and I'm just running every practice day from on ice to off ice to the food to making, all those things. And that's the job, right? It's especially when you're a one-man show. It's like, if you're going to try to spearhead something or make change, you better make sure that it's being done the right way. And I think that's, to your point about the shiny objects, is like, if I didn't start with the coaching and the relationship side, then none of that other stuff happens, and like the food was an easy win, but it made it more of the, now the players know that I care about them. Now the players know that I'm in it for them. And then when I introduce the tech and when I introduce a couple shiny things, it's like, oh, they're way more, accepting of, put on this monitor. Like I had coaches calling me after my first year saying like, how did you get the guys to wear the monitors? I'm like, what do you mean? Like I asked them to wear it, and then I would show them their information after the fact and we'd talk about it. Whereas I think even it still happens now. Like you get guys that say like, oh yeah, we don't get to look at our own data. And I'm like, wow, like that's such a head scratcher to me. Like, I think it's yours. It's your data that like, I don't know. I'm going off now, but I think part of it is just realizing what they actually care about, and it's not, how much they're trap bar deadlifting. It's how much, how many games they're getting to play, how good they feel, and contract money, right? Like it's their job, right? And I think if you can help with that, then you're going to get a lot of wins.
I think what you said about being a one man show. It reminds me of a conversation I had with Matty Nickel, and he talked about his early days in Toronto. He said, "Ant, I was essentially doing it all." And I told him the same thing I would tell you is I think that's outstanding. And I know that you might say, well, geez, in today's NHL, you got, now you got your sports science guy, you got your catapult guy, you got your on some teams, right? But it allows you to build those relationships, although you might be feeling like you're stretched at both ends. And it allows you, when you do implement things, to have, in my opinion, potentially better buy in. My other question to follow up is that, looking back now, do you think if you were to step in the National Hockey League tomorrow, it would be tougher to create that culture because there's so many cooks in the kitchen? Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
now you're going in and you're integrating with, and by the way, I'm not saying this. I'm not trying to ask a loaded question, so I'm not. I'm a sports science person. Sometimes I think there's a lot of noise being collected, and that's okay. I'll point the thumb at myself on this. Like, I'm a passionately curious person. From the Edmonton Oilers, Chad Drummond. Yeah, he told me a long time ago, on a previous show, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Interesting or important? Is it interesting or important? And
That's a good way to say
and
it.
it's like, oh my God, like there's a lot of interesting things. I don't know how important they are. So maybe a better question, and I don't want to ask you a loaded, like, if you were to go back tomorrow, do you think it would be different to try to establish that culture? Like, do you think there was a benefit back in those days?
Man, that's a tough question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, and I just had an offer recently, and it was a really good one, and it was, a lot of good things that I thought, oh, maybe this is something I want to do. But I will say that if I don't have the chance to build the team, I think I'm less interested to go into a team,
Yeah, makes
and
sense.
that sounds really arrogant, or, what people can take that whatever way they want. But I think even coming to Kelowna, like we have a phenomenal group, like not only my business partner, but our medical people. I have a guy who started as an intern, ended up doing his master's. Now he's doing his PhD. Someone I want to connect you with at some point. Bryce, and he's phenomenal. He's our sports science lead. He takes in all the information. He's one of those guys who just gets shit done. And, you know, he'd be on my team. I know strength coaches that would be on my team, so I think, would it be harder now? Yes. Other than, could I go in and build my own? I'm not going to go in and, it's not about firing people or anything like that. It's just more about, if I can control those variables, then, who you're bringing on the bus, and I think that's probably more important than anything else. And, the interesting versus important, I feel like I've said that in another way, and I'm not taking anything away from Trad, but it's such a good point that, there's no absolutes, right? The data we collect, the stuff that we see, it's just information. Now, I think, and I've probably said this before and stolen it from somebody, but any good data should back up my intuition as a coach. If it looks like shit and it jumps like shit, well, you can imagine that the results aren't going to be very good. So, I'm trying to layer that into, a guy like Bryce who's, wants to get into the sports science field, and I often say that I'll be working for him at some point someday. And he's somebody that, I'm trying to layer that in. He still, does some S&C coaching. He still does, he still gets his hands dirty. And I'm like, dude, you have to keep doing that, because you don't want to get disconnected from what's happening. And, you don't want to speak to the data in terms that athletes no longer understand it. And I think he's done a great job with like leaderboards and, like making it competitive, and then, injury tracking, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, now it's important. Now our athletes see it in a totally different way. Guys who didn't want to jump before, guys who didn't put much value in it, all of a sudden we're framing it in a way that says like, no, this is your data, and this is how we're basing lots of our decision making, or we're putting weight into this in terms of our decision making. Not all the weight, but some, and it's an increasing amount of weight because the tools that you have access to now are incredible. So I think, again, going into a team, it would be, the caveat of like, do I get to pick that team? What kind of influence do I have on that team? And then, realistically, it's where do I fit in? Am I a good fit with that team? I know who I am as a coach, and I think that's, that takes a while. It takes a while to realize, I was talking to a couple of young coaches about this not that long ago, is you have to be kind of a chameleon in some ways, and what I got really good at, especially in Anaheim, because we never had days off from the rink. So, as those guys came through the door, you could say, oh, it's going to be a good day for John today. John's in a good mood, making lots of eye contact. He's very social. I'm going to get John to do more today because of how he's coming into the gym. The very next day, oh, John's got his hood up, not making eye contact. All I'm going to get out of John today is what he feels he needs to do, which again are all the things that I've implemented, but he's not going to do any more. So if I go over to him and push him to do more on a day like that, I'm going to lose him for a few days or longer. So I have to be able to kind of check myself to a degree and say, you know what? I'm going to leave him alone today. I'm not going to bug him. And he's going to get his work done. But on the days where he comes and he's ready, and yeah, I'm going to add 10 to 15% more and I'm going to get him out of it. Right. So I think, that kind of thing is, is so important to be whatever the environment needs for that day. And that sounds like, you don't have a plan. Yeah, of course we have a plan, but like, guess what? Every other night, like travel, sickness, family life, there's so much stuff that goes into it. And because you play so much, it's like, you have to be willing to adjust. You have to be willing to like adapt. And I know those are cliche things, but they're cliche for a reason. I think I got good at doing that. And it was always met with positivity because I think the players felt like, okay, he gets it. He knows where we're at. He knows what we need. So we're going to do it. You know what I'm trying to say?
I do. To me, I call that a heat meter. And I come back to like, it's not the smartest person in the room. It's not the person with the biggest mouth. It's the person who can read the room most effectively. For coaching, for me, that's the art of coaching, right? I mean, you've got to be able to understand the environment, understand the athlete, and from my experience, I again heard a long while ago from a former NHL conditioning coach. He said coaching's a lot like parenting. At a young age, a directive approach is warranted. Like I'm not going to tell 10-year-old Tom, I'm going to tell him what to do. But if he's 18, 19, 20 years old, that same approach, you're going to lose guys really quick. And we work with a different demographic in the in-season. When you visited Columbus, you saw our gym. We worked 16s, 15s, and 18s, the AAA teams, and we'll try to pick a bell cow or two in each of those teams, like Dan Paff would call. Your leadership group where you get the temperature, the thermostat. I'm not going to go over to a guy that's always going to tell me I feels like crap, right? I'm going to go to those bell cows, and we can adjust and adapt and obviously look at the game schedule appropriately. But nothing, I always say the map is not the terrain. So everything's subject to change. Can you keep it as close to plan A as possible in a perfect world? But sometimes the real world kicks in and you have to adjust. So I think it comes back to me as well. An old Matt Jordan quote. He said, the perception of the program may be more important than the program itself. And if you don't build that trust, you're dead in the waters, my opinion.
I would say last thing, like I think too, is like get your own ego out of the way and listen to the athletes, especially guys or girls who know their bodies and who are in tune, not the ones who are trying to get out of stuff, but the ones who actually get it. You should be paying attention. And I find when I do that, it doesn't mean I completely change course, but it could mean that I adjust a little bit based on feedback. And I think that's, I mean, the thing I say 6 million times a day throughout the last 4 months is, how you feeling? How you feeling today? What's going on? Right. And it's just like you start collecting that information. It's like, oh, okay. And then you hear the same or similar responses from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 people. It's like, okay.
It's so interesting, because I've made all these mistakes, and I'm not bashing any technology, but we always want to go back to numbers instead of just saying, how do you feel? Like, I made terrible mistakes with HRV. By the way, I'm not bashing HRV. Here's a problem that happened with us. We dealt with 4 Summer Olympians, and it's like, instead of just saying, how did you feel today? Or looking at body language and making adjustments, you go by numbers. And those numbers, unless you measure at the same time, you eat the same foods, they're willing to lay down for 4 minutes. If those things don't match up, which very rarely happens in the real world, you're at times I see you're collecting noise. And you're making decisions where you could just simply say, how do you feel today, bud? Or just looking at your body language. Maybe it's your hoodie, like you said, pulled over, and you're not talking. Just basic, right?
You turn it to the females. Like, we just had a big camp here 2 weeks ago. We had about 40 guys in town. It was awesome. And part of the camp week is education. We do an afternoon with all the coaches who are here. Actually, Matt Price came in and did a talk. It was amazing. And one of our naturopaths did a presentation on like female physiology and like training around the monthly cycle. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, like I got to lean into this more, because it matches up with every girl, every young woman that we train. And it's just like the sliding scale of like where they're coming into and it's like, this makes so much sense. And again, just back to those questions around like, hey, how you feeling? And then going over to Bryce and saying like, how were her jumps today? Oh, they're down a little bit. All right. That's what I thought. Like, okay, we're going to do this instead today, or we're going to adjust this volume here. And, she's going to go do X, Y, and Z. I don't know. I just feel like it's constantly being micro adjusting, and making sure that like they know why. And it's not a defeative thing or a defeating thing. It's more of like hey, be smart, train smart, right? Like leave reps in the tank. I say these types of things like so much that like the athletes now make fun of it, like they'll walk out of the gym like reps in the tank, like stuff like that, where it's like, okay, that's fine with me. They're thinking about it. They understand why I want to do that. And I think a lot of other coaches or some coaches cannot explain the whole process enough. And, it's like, hey, you don't play hockey until September. We're not going to do conditioning in May. Like we're not going to do conditioning in May for the sport you play in September. We're going to do different types of work throughout then. But in my opinion, most of your conditioning should take place on the field of play. That's just I'm sure that's a whole other podcast, but that bugs me because it's like, I can make people tired very quickly, but so can my 10-year-old, right? Like that's not the job. That's not our job.
It's going to lead me right into a beautiful transition, because this is a huge passion point for you. And I'm going to go back and forth with you because I want to talk minor hockey. And you've got kids. You've got a U13 Kane, Molly and Cal, twins, or 10U, correct?
Yeah.
Here's what I challenge the kids with this summer. I've never, let me say in youth hockey, and I have to watch how I speak. I have never seen it like I've seen it the past 2.5 years in Columbus, Ohio. Never. So I'm going to give you a backdrop. Season ends in AAA. 2 weeks later, you have tryouts. You have spring skates that lead up to tryouts and spring skates that follow. From there, you have summer skates run by coaches. Now, we do the strength and conditioning. I'm not trying to speak out of both sides of my mouth. I'm not. But the point I'm making is you've got kids that never get off the ice. I use the analogy this summer. I stole this. I found it on 2 things that I wanted to harp on with the kids. Number 1, if hard work was a key to success, the donkey would run the farm. Donkeys don't run farms. Okay? Smart people run farms. And the last one is, I've got 2 yellow labs at home. They sit in air conditioning and get well fed. They're lazy. Hungry dogs bite. Be a hungry dog. So the point I'm trying to make is more is not better. Better is better. Get off the ice and focus on what matters most. Now, that might change if you're working with a National Hockey League player, right? Now, when I say that, I'd have to watch how I say it. I don't mean the conditioning part on the ice. I'm talking the skill work on the ice and the skill refinement. And that's my opinion based on my experience. But I'm talking minor hockey now. Do you see that in Canada in terms of ice volume?
Oh, man, you and I could build six more arenas in this small town and we'd be printing money because it is absolutely mental. And I'm right in the thick of it. Like my kids are, that perfect age where, they're playing rep and they're, or, whatever you want to call it. They're not house league kids. And which is, I'm not saying that house league kids are bad. I'm just saying like they're playing competitive hockey where they're on the ice, da da da. Da. And the fight that I have, or not even a fight, it's almost like they want my opinion for some things, and I'm speaking about hockey parents, and this is more actually it's probably my son's age who's 12 turning 13 this year and playing for like the top team that he can play for. And the parents are, oh, what can you do for him? I'm like, well, I don't think you really need me. It's more about like, does your again, I just made a note, like, does your kid know how to skip with a skipping rope? And I had a parent last night who I've known for a couple of years since we've moved here. And he said to me, his son is skipping every day. And I'm like, oh, it's amazing. He's like, yeah, it's something you told him to do. And he just like loves it. And I said, oh, I didn't kind of forgot about it. And he's like, yeah, like, so we got in, and this is a little bit of a long story, but we kind of got into like the why. And I said, in my opinion, it's one of those underrated skills that most kids do not know how to do. And if you turn back the clock X amount of years, it was more of like you kind of had to know how to do it. Like it was a more of a normal thing. And people, oh, what can they do pregame? Running laps. And I'm like, no, just go get a skipping rope and skip. And it's coordination, it's timing, it's rhythm, it's all things that are going to dump into being an athlete. Anyways, this dad was talking to me last night, and he's like, he was doing some training with a group of kids, and they gave him all skipping ropes, and his kid was the only one that could actually do it out of like six or seven kids. I'm like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Like it's a skill that has gone out the window because it's not sport specific, and it's like I and don't get me wrong, it's a hard thing not to fall into. Honest to God, it really is because if your kid, my 12-year-old is a good little hockey player. Will it mean anything? Probably not, but he's learning a lot. He's learning how to work. He's learning how to, deal with adversity, be on a team, et cetera, et cetera. But the amount of people who think that their 10-year-old is going to play in the NHL is through the roof, and like those are the people that are really like, let's say driving the bus, but they're adding fuel to the fire, right? And they're, oh, we're doing this, invite only skate with all the top players. It's just like, give me a break. Like, give me a break. Your kid doesn't even want to be here. Like, does your kid play any other sports? Oh, no, not really. Like, oh, like I've seen NHL guys who can't throw a football, who have come up their whole, careers not really playing any other sports. And guess what happens to them? They don't last. They don't last. Their talent gets them to a certain point. I brought up a guy, Ryan Getzlaf, is probably one of the best athletes I've ever seen. Him and I would play football before games. We'd throw a football around, and he's 40 yards away from me, just like no problem. And there's guys on our team who couldn't throw the ball like at all. And that to me was always like why can't you do this? Like, and then you start to, oh, what sports did you play? Oh, I went to junior hockey, hockey. I didn't really play any other sports. It's like, oh my God, like why not? Like it's mind-boggling to me. And like Getzey could, scratch golf, or he's the only guy on our team to hit the ball at Angel Stadium when we went for batting practice. Like these other guys couldn't even hit a pitch. And it was like, yes, that's a skill. People would argue that, but most good athletes are going to figure out how to do it, right? And I don't know. The lack of athleticism is what scares me, and like we had a little dryland session last night with Kane's team, and you're trying to teach kids. My whole thought when I do, dryland with kids like that is athleticism. Teach them how to be in their bodies. Teach them the importance of positions and positional strength. And we do some gymnastics, we do some sprinting, we do some agility stuff. We do like positioning. We last night we finished with like basically like a tug of war. Two kids grab a med ball and it's like, okay, end up with the ball. How are you going to do it? And I find like stuff like when you mix all those things together, you get a really high amount of engagement, and I think if I'm there, doing sets and reps, and I'm sure there's some value to that too, but for me, it's about engagement. If all those kids are paying attention to every word I'm saying, if they're competing and they're figuring out how to like get shit done, that to me is like next level. Because a lot of these kids, like, they just don't understand. Like, we're jumping up onto a low box or we're doing a broad jump, and it's like everything just like collapses. And it's like, okay, stop. Let's talk about why you need to be here when you land, like, and some kids just don't know how to put those things together. And some it's just about like, exposure to things like that, for sure. But a lot of them, it's because they've never had any sort of exposure. Like, you look at their feet, you look at like, how can you not do a push-up at 12 years old? Like, how? Like, that's just, and it's not about being able to do 100 push-ups. It's about being able to do 10, or at least your age, with perfect form. I don't think that's a far off thing that is like, too much, right? Like, it's crazy, man. It really is. It's getting worse and worse. And I think it's part of the bit of a downfall of hockey. I mean, I would say hockey, but I think most sports are in the same category, but hockey just seems worse, I think, because of the nature of the sport itself. The skates, like they in hockey itself, like, skating is not natural. I don't care who you are. It is not natural. Like,
No, it was just, I just actually wrote a quick blog post on this the other day. Eric Cressy, and I'm just paraphrasing this. He said, and he's obviously, everyone, for those who don't know, Eric Cressy works in baseball, but he said, worrying about, and this is a paraphrase, worrying about rotator cuff strength, shoulder range of motion, and capsular stability during the in season, excuse me, is the equivalent of changing a tire on a moving car. Like, if you don't have the opportunity to do that in the off season, and my comment to Eric was the same as hips in hockey. Like, you wonder why, you never get off the ice. But I do think, and it's a struggle, at least from my experience in the private sector, and it's always an uphill battle, because when one demographic of parents and kids move on, then you get another influx that come in. It's all about educating, but it's a challenge. It's a really big challenge. And then obviously what young kids see on TV and social media doesn't help. Expectations of parents. I always tell parents, when we have the opportunity to speak to them, at least in the in season, we show them the game and the practice volume. Now, I'll give you an example. So at an 18 level, AAA, it is an OHL season, 64 games played, 82 practices, and 38 strength and conditioning sessions. It averages one active day every day of the week in season. So this is in season. So here's what we tell our kids. Same analogy I talked to you about, the donkey running the farm, trimming the fat. And then I say, guys, a good program in season should look like my hairline. Short, sweet, and you get the heck out. I said, look, our goal is, we're constantly in a state of juggling balls. The biggest ball right now is the game schedule in hockey. We want to try to keep you fresh, but we also can get you strong. During this time, I want you to view it as playing the guitar. You would never walk out of a guitar lesson and say, man, unbelievable lesson. I vomited, my fingers can't move. You'd say, hey, I moved better. I got up and down the fretboard. I hit this key better. That, to me, is what we want to try to accomplish in season. Because I don't want that phone call from a coach or you saying, coach, my legs were so sore today. We have 3-3 the next day. Now, that's an 18 player. Now, I might take that approach differently with a younger player, but the point I'm trying to make is we've got to try to educate, because this is another thing. Like, the more is better mentality. It's not just in hockey. It's everything. It's like, it's like taking the equivalent of like, hey man, I got a headache. Here's 22 Tylenol. Like, no. Just give it. Here's a half. I'll give you a half and come back to see me. But the more is better. It's getting out of hand.
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskov. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain, Go, Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Donskov strength and conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonydonskov.gumroad, GUMROAD.com. Thanks for listening.
Well, it's out of hand. It is out of hand. And I think it's funny. Made a note while you were talking. It's like, to go back to Matt Jordan, the perception, as a young coach, we had the gym that I was at or worked at, it had a viewing area, like a lobby. So the parents would sit in there and watch, which was a terrible idea. But as a young coach, I kind of figured out if I send these kids out of here with red faces and breathing heavy, and when I pay attention to when the parents are in there and I raise my voice a few times, all of a sudden, all these teams and these kids wanted to train with me because I was like the serious guy, or I was the, whatever, all because I was playing the game of perception. The last 3 minutes, I could get their faces red pretty quickly, right? We'd do some whatever, fill in the blank. That wasn't what they missed. All the good stuff they missed when we were doing split squats with the tempo and learning position and all that, when it was kind of boring. And then I just raised my voice a few times and the parents are going, oh, he's really getting after them in there, right? That's one side of it, where I don't do that as much anymore because I don't care. Not that I don't care about the kids, I just don't care about the perception. But the bigger problem with hockey, in my opinion, and this could go into other sports too, I don't know, is as you ascend the different ranks of hockey, it doesn't get better. And that to me is like the kids that get to train with you guys, incredible. And I think the kids that get to train with us, they're very lucky too. And again, we could come together on a list of a lot of other places that are doing great work. However, we work with some junior teams, and it's like I had a conversation with one of the medical guys, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to run a 5K as part of their testing." And I'm just like, man, like I respect you as a person and a professional, but I don't agree. I think that's one of the dumbest things you could possibly do. And when I look at testing now, it's like, what is repeatable throughout the season? Can we jump? Can we do a grip? Can we do a mid-thigh pull? Mini Wingate 6-second burst on the bike. Perfect. I can get so much information over the course of the year. Is it repeatable? Even when we were in Toronto, like we do this bulk of testing once a year and we never do it again. And it's like, I thought it was just normal, and it was normal. But now it's like, how many times can we test and not take away from the athletes and, give them information, make adjustments, et cetera, et cetera. But as I was going back to, as you ascend until you get to the NHL, it's not good. Like Canadian junior hockey is a crapshoot. You'll get some teams that have a facility and a full-time strength coach. You'll get other teams who have nothing.
Here's my narrative on that, Fitzy, and I could be wrong. This is my narrative. I could talk doing this for hours, and I won't. I speak from my experience. I think the reason that happens, this is my opinion, is because ownership, universities don't value the position enough to pay a good, well-experienced coach. What happens is, in my opinion, you don't value that position enough to pay well enough, so you get really young coaches who think exactly what, well, I'm just going to crush these guys. They're going to listen. When all you have is a whip, it's hard to give whipped cream, right? Like, and when I'm looking, hey, by the way, I'm pointing my thumb. When I was a young coach, that was like, oh man, Anth came in, man. Here he's going to whoop. Here comes. And now, like you just said, it's like experience comes at the user's expense. At 25 years of experience versus 1 year of experience 25 times, I would like to think you and I have 25 years of experience, and we can honestly say, hey, golly, guys, boy, were we off on that. But I truly believe that's one of the big problems, though. Do you agree with that?
Well, and I said it before, about my thought process about staying in the US. You go to a school like, I don't know, Tennessee or Ohio State, like you're making really good money and the facilities are next level, and you're judged on, maybe sometimes too harshly, but like you're judged on your performance or the team's performance. So if you're not doing a good job, like you're out. And again, that comes with a big grain of salt, and those guys, you go to Canadian university, like I have a long-standing relationship with Ontario Tech University. It's less than 25 years old. I got in when they first opened the hockey program, and we used to do workouts in the squash courts and like just craziness. And, it took me 15 years until they have a full-time strength coach, which is one of my coaches who is now paid a good wage, benefits, whatever. 15 years. There's over 500 varsity athletes now, one strength coach. Now, because of the scenario, we've built out a whole intern program. Like, I think we've done a really good job, and it's, not obviously me, but the staff. And, they gave us a space on the size of my office to train 500 athletes. And it got so busy, it forced them to be like, oh, I guess we really need this. And, the AD is awesome. He gets it, but it comes down to what the university will invest in, and it's not even on him because he gets it. But again, it's such a bigger problem. And I did some work with the equivalent of the Canadian NCAA, although it isn't really comparable. However, it's what our university system, and the guy at the time who was the president was like, how do we get more like the NCAA? I started laughing. I'm like, man, like we have no chance. Like you have some schools that don't even have a gym. You have some schools that pay like random people to come in and train their teams who have no business doing it, right? So in order to do that, you must have to, we got to create at least a standard that starts down here and then we build on top of, and then, whatever that. What I was going to get back to too with the youth training side of it is what I've really started to pick up on lately. And Kelowna is also, filled with hockey players, but a lot of former hockey players. And you start looking at what some of these kids are doing, and training and on ice, and it's just nonstop. It's like there's something called compound interest, and it usually relates to the financial world, but it's compound interest in a very negative way. Like, it works until it doesn't. It's bad until, or it's not bad until it is. And I feel like you probably see this too, where from 15 to 18, good training, bad training, you're getting away with murder. You're getting away with, like, right? Like, and I'm very like, I try to be very, pay close attention to what we're doing with that age group. And I'm trying to, especially with our academy coaches and stuff, it's like, make sure you're teaching. If it takes away from the intensity of the day, I don't care. Teach them how to bench press, teach them how to squat, teach them how to pick something up off the floor, because that's good compound interest. They're going to need that later on. And like, we're going to try to teach as much as we can, because once they get to wherever they're gotten to, it's like, okay, I'm comfortable. I can do all this stuff. I know how to hinge. I know how to squat. I know the difference between the two. And what I'm seeing now is just like, we get these kids who are, broken basically at 18, 19. It's like, what have you been doing? What have you been doing and why? And they tell me about some of this stuff, and it's just like, oh, we start our workouts with a 3-mile run. It's like, what? Like,
Fitzy, it's got to the point for us at times, like we'll see kids. I've talked to parents about this. I'm like, oh, wait. I'm like, you can't do this. We had a kid come in that I only through conversation to find out that not only is he training with us 4 times a week in the summer, he's working out with his high school team. I said, guys, this is the more is not better. And parents get hooked into this, hooked into this, hooked into this. Yeah, we have, I say, a rule. You never push business away, but we've had this since the inception. If you're training in another facility, don't be here. And that's not a mean thing, right? Because the point is, if something does happen, it's like a science experiment, right? Like how are we to know whatever caused whatever if there's so many variables involved, right? So it's and coupled with that, I've heard this more and more too. Yeah, I've got my speed guy, I've got my power guy, I've got my mental, and that's okay. All that's, but guys, how many cooks do you need in the kitchen? I tell young kids this too. Your best resume is 200 by 85 foot. That's your best resume. What's your goal? Write it on a piece of paper. Here's what you need to do as an athlete that wants to get better. What on my piece of paper is going to help that goal? And the challenge to you is, how can you take away from that list as opposed to add to that list? Because it goes right back to what we just talked about. I got to do this. I'm on the ice 3 times. It's May.
Well, and the interesting part too is, and it's something that I started thinking more about in the last, let's say 7 to 10 years, is what is my job? What is my job as a coach and a performance coach, whatever the hell you want to call me? My job is to make sure and support the hockey player's ability to play the game. So if I'm taking away opportunities for that individual to practice or play, then I'm not doing my job. And I think a higher amount of coaches than what should be are still focused on bigger, faster, stronger, or numbers or whatever. And I was like that too. I didn't really, but I feel like that was a pretty long time ago, and it takes a few hard lessons to realize, like, maybe that's not the best way to do it. And we always, we have the number 82 around the gym, 82 games. That's the goal. The goal is not, 400-pound trap bar deadlift. But if that's the number you end up at and it's great and the reps are good and we're good, awesome. And that's the number. But I don't really care about that number, and like the more conversations you have with, especially guys who have played a little bit, guys who've been in the NHL a little bit, who are like, I want to feel good. It's like, okay, what does feel good mean? Well, it means, I'm right around this body weight. I feel snappy on the ice. I'm here. And like, you take some of that information in and you're like, okay, well, if I put you in a, 5-day-a-week grind program, I'm just going to kill you, right? I'm just going to wear you out. And like, you're not going to feel good, and it's funny you say about like the speed guy and the other people. And, we've had some of those kids too. And I think I'm going to put my foot down even more next summer. It's like, our program is 5 days a week, right? In the summertime, it's Monday to Friday, weekends are off. The way that I look at it is, Monday's medium Monday. That's never our hardest day. That might be something I took from you, or at least that thought process. And typically for us, Monday is linear acceleration day. It's typically shorter in volume. It's mobility focused, whatever. But we get work done, but it's specific to the whole recipe. And, Tuesday we lift, Wednesday we're lateral agility, Thursday we lift again, and Friday's more of like again, trying to fill some buckets, like metabolic complex type stuff and some strongman. And I feel like it's a well-balanced program for the athletes that we have, for our facility, X, Y, and Z. And it's funny because the people who just show up 5 times a week, don't miss. And when they are going to miss, they tell us in advance so we can plan. And those are the athletes that do the best. It's not the ones that are like off doing this and off at this camp and doing all this. It's the ones who show up the most consistently. And they surprise themselves. They're like, oh, my times keep doing this. Like, you're showing up. You're showing up ready to go, hydrated, fed, etc. And you're not trying to, excuse my language, fuck with my recipe. And not that I'm some sort of, I'm not. But the recipe of like, I thought about this stuff. This isn't just me going to the whiteboard and doing the WOD. This is thought out, and we're taking you through stuff so that you end up in a better place.
100% favorable prerequisites, I call it. You know, another thing that really messes with recipes, at least I see in Ohio, and kids just get, and it's parents too. It's coupled with this, is these combines, I put in air quotes, and invites to either USHL, North American League, NCDC, you name the league. In my opinion, 3/4 of them are complete money grabs. I talked to a kid this year, one of our U18 players, 10 teams at a camp. How the hell can you evaluate that? Hey, you know, you're paying $400, and here's what I tell all the kids. What are the opportunity costs of you going there? Besides the out of pocket and time, the opportunity cost, training, potential targeted interventions on the ice, skill sessions. I'm a big fan, specifically at the higher levels of hockey. You know, I do think, you know, June, July, targeted skill work. Notice I didn't say conditioning. I think that's really important. You play the game with skates and a stick. You don't play it in the weight room. You want to get better playing the game, you got to work on your skills. It comes at a cost. But these camps and these money grabs, kids are doing 5, 6 of these a summer. It's crazy.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is like those camps, in my experience, aren't set up for any sort of like with the athlete in mind. It's set up to get people through. It's set up to be efficient from a business perspective, which I'm not hating on them necessarily. I know you're not either, but it's just like those things aren't going to be, you know, to the athlete's benefit like consistent training. And I've said this before, and I feel like people sometimes have a different opinion or different feedback, but I think good training is relatively boring. I do. And I don't think it's boring in the way that, like, you know, you got to watch a movie with subtitle, you know, whatever. It's not like in the typical way. When I say that, I'm saying if you do it properly, you teach the athlete how to get through things. You teach the athlete how to stay focused. You teach the athlete how to, you know, sometimes I'll say, hey, put your mind in another place. Put your mind in another place and get the work done. Not all the time, because I don't think that's good either. I want them engaged. I want our athletes to, you know, in the same breath, I would say, hey, no, we're here now. Pay attention. Here's how I want you landing the jump. Hip, knee, ankle, you know, sit into it, feel it. Don't check out on me right now. And then the other times I'll say, you know what? We got shuttles. Just get them done. Get them done. Focus on your breathing, but just check out and go. Right. And I think those things are like, I think those are extremely valuable to the overall process of training. Right. And I also think that, you know, when you lean into that as an athlete, when you understand that, like, yeah, it's okay to be frustrated during a workout, or it's okay to be like, man, this sucks, right? Like, you know, this is my 4th set of trap bar deadlift, and Mark keeps telling me to, you know, like sit my hips back and, you know, et cetera. But that builds on, you know, the skill of training. And, you know, I talked before with another, an interview similar to this, and it was like, most of my hockey players don't love training. I might get one, and I'm sure you're the same. I might get like one gym rat a summer who just wants to lift, who wants to do all this stuff, and they're awesome. They typically are the guys and girls that aren't the best hockey players, unfortunately. Yeah, but at the end of the day, if I can get a pro or an NCAA athlete to respect training and understand why it's important, and to get them to lean into it and make it a part of their life, that's a win. It's not getting people to love it. Like, if you're chasing that, you're going to be very disappointed continually. And, you know, that one gym rat that you're looking at, you know, that's not, and that's great, but that's kind of an anomaly, especially now. Like, training isn't as embedded as it is in a sport like football or a sport like rugby, where it's just kind of part of it. It's getting there for sure, but hockey's still not, you know, it's better than it was, but it's still not as like interwoven into the sport, I don't think. So there's an understanding there of, hey, if our athletes don't love it, well, you better find ways to make the engagement higher, and you better find ways to make the overall experience, say more enjoyable. That's not the word I'm going for, but, more engaging, more, I don't know the right word, but you better find something that sticks, makes it sticky, right? And what is that? Is it your coaching style? Is it the way you do things? Is it, your explanation and education, which I lean on heavily? Hey, if I don't know the answer to something, I'll find it. I'll reach out to my network, and I'm honest with my athletes. Hey, have you ever seen this before? Nope, but I bet I could find someone that has. Give me a day, right? And like that type of interaction, I think, is part of what makes a good coach.
So the pendulum again. We're staying on the youth hockey development and the youth players. What do we need to focus on? Like, how do we make this better? Is it? And I think we've talked about this, and I think some of those answers have come from this conversation. A lot of it, finding a love, finding a way, eliminating, mixing recipes, education. Do you feel like we almost need some sort of an educational board? I know USA Hockey and Hockey Canada strive to educate parents on this. Can we do more?
I think we can. I think, I mentioned Brent Seabrook, and he's a former hockey guy who really gets it. And I don't think you don't find that too often. And I'm not being, disrespectful, but Brent is a guy, obviously I spend a lot of time with him, but he's a guy that has played and had success, but he's not a guy who's leaning on that success to, create his opinion of today's hockey player. He's a guy that wants to know what today's hockey player is all about. And I find that fascinating. And I think, like, because it's part of my job too. It's like, and you said it earlier on, like, I don't yell at people anymore. Like, maybe the odd day if it's been a long day, but, whereas before, I'd be very vocal. But like people that, like, our athletes don't like that now. If I yell at somebody, I might lose that client. Like, and it's not me yelling at them personally necessarily, but it's yelling at maybe a lack of X, Y, and Z. But I think coaching is teaching, and I think more of our profession needs to lean into that and realize, like, that's really the job. That's really the job, is to teach and to educate. And I think, guys like Brent who are asking those questions are phenomenal, but there's too few of them, because in my opinion, I need someone like Brent to back me up, because I didn't play, but if I get a guy like Brent to back me up, my opinion, like, or my advice or my voice or whatever is amplified, and I think that, we need some of these players who have gone through stuff and who have had coaches like yourself and me and Matty Nickel and Matt Price, all these guys that we mentioned, to be more vocal, and they're not all like Brent, I don't think, I know. But the ones that are, like, we need to use them as, sounding boards, because I think still a lot of parents will like look at a person like me and say, well, it's your business. It's like, yeah, but it's also my profession. Like, I'm not a plumber. You wouldn't want me to come to your house to fix your plumbing. I would do a terrible job of it. So when I tell you something that revolves around what I do and what I've spent my entire life doing, maybe you should take some more stock in it. It's not just me picking shit out of the air, right? So I think the education side is massive. And I think USA Hockey does a good job. Hockey Canada still, I find, very arrogant, and like they've got it all figured out, which nobody does. I think I was potentially going to do a project with them that would look to bring more of the private sector people in-house and create some content and education, whatever, but it just kind of fell apart. But I think those initiatives where, we're going into the private sector and helping those coaches, educating those coaches even, and I think it's a big job. Will it ever get done? I don't know. But there's definitely room for it, and there's definitely a space for it to live. I just don't know. I wish I had the answer. I wish you had the answer to kind of, keep building it, other than doing what I'm doing, on a small scale, but it's a tough job.
Maybe we need to, gives me an idea. Maybe we need to get another podcast on with a round table, for, and we'll come up with a list. And on a serious note, everything from off ice training schedule, for the parent. So this is dedicated and geared towards the parent and what to expect coming from well-established coaches such as yourself. I think that, a small way to possibly spread a message from people that have been there, done that, and their hearts are in the right places. So,
Yeah, 100%.
okay, last question regarding the craft. If you were to change, if you were to start all over, would you change anything? And I'm going to piggyback and ask, what would your advice be to young coaches coming up, looking to do what you're trying to do or what you've accomplished?
I don't know. I don't know if I would change anything because I feel like you learn those lessons along the way. Would I probably change some little things for sure? I was pretty stubborn as a young coach. I still kind of am, but I was
You and I both, Fitzy.
yeah, I was, I think my ego as a young coach was, one of those things that got me, got me to where I am, I guess, if that makes sense, but it also hindered me in a lot of ways. I mentioned talking to Sean about the Anaheim job, and he was giving me advice that I should have listened to a little bit more. And because of the ego, I was just like, I'm good. Right. So, would I've changed that? I don't know. I think, as I kind of did different things along the way, I think I would have maybe paid a little closer attention to kind of being all in on those things. I was trying to do, and I still do it now, which is definitely something that my wife yells at me for, is like, I like to spin a lot of plates. And it's, I wish I would have realized that sooner. I got just diagnosed. A friend of mine who's a sports psych was like, "You got ADHD for sure." I'm like, "What do you mean?" So I started taking some stuff for it, and it's like game changer. So I wish I would have leaned into that sooner and kind of like explored that a little bit more. I think it would have really helped me. But it's also at the same time, I feel like it's helped me in a positive way because I love what I do, and I always like to be in the game and be in the mix with whatever it is, right? So maybe I wouldn't have changed it. It's tough to say, right? I think with today's young coach, it's, learn how to be in the room. And I've said it a million times, but it's, the personal side of it, the egoless side of it as much as possible. I mentioned before with the Ducks, like, just changing the mentality of the room. And one story like BX, we're still pretty close, and the team was down. We were losing, and our coach and GM at the time would never give us days off, and whatever. So guys didn't want to be there, and you would some people would scoff at that and say, "Oh, they're millionaires," and it doesn't matter. It's still a job, and it's still, when you're coming to that rink and you don't want to be there, and yeah, we're in Southern California, but there's not a window to be had in that place. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You could be in Utah or Syracuse, or you could be in Orange County. It doesn't matter. And there was a day, I did this a few times, where like, the group is down. It's like, okay, how do I become a conduit to lift our group up? And it's like, are you willing to put yourself out there? And so like, I'd always wear a hoodie, always. It's just, I don't know, one of those things. Maybe it was easy. Maybe it was because it was cold down there, whatever. And so I'm like, took off the hoodie and I had the t-shirt on, and it probably was a little tighter than it needed to be.
Medium.
Medium. And as soon as like the fellas started coming into the room, every one of them is just like, "Holy, what is going on? Like, Fitzy, did you do arms today?" Like, they just like attacking me. And I knew it, and I was fine with it. I didn't care, like, but I knew, I had an idea of what it would do, right? And all of a sudden, the whole room is up here. The whole room is like engaged, and the whole room is like, whether they're engaged in strength and conditioning, I don't really care. It's the social energy went up. The movement in the room went up. Everything went up, and all of a sudden, we win that night. I don't know. Did I have something to do with it? I think I did it to some degree, because you just change the texture of the room, or you change the environment just enough to make it not about hockey for 5 minutes and more about how tight Fitzy's shirt is, and it's like interesting how you can kind of like play with those things. And go into the private side. The private side is so cool because it's like relationship development. It's like, I think if you do the private side right, which in my opinion, you do it as well, is you create lifelong relationships with people, right? And Josh Bailey is a client of mine for 20 years, and he was playing his 1,000th game last fall, and he flew me and my two boys to watch it. And we're sitting there, and it's just like, I started with Josh when he was 17. And now my kids are there, his kids are there, and we're sitting watching this game. I'm going, holy shit, this is incredible. And afterwards, we're at the bar, just kind of celebrating, and my kids are running around with their jerseys and getting autographs and whatever. And him and I are just looking at each other, and we both got like choked up. And it's just like, I was saying thank you, and he was saying thank you to me. And I was just like, this is insane. Like, from where that is such the cool part about hockey especially. I don't know if it's the same in other sports. I don't think it is. Maybe there's some things for sure, but that was a special thing for sure. But like, I try to create that with everybody. I try to find those, like, the jerseys and stuff. That's not a ego thing. Those are important people to me, and the messages on those things are not just like, best wishes. They're personal things. They're like relationship things. I'm at their weddings. I'm meeting their children. Like, I don't know, that's what gets me excited about coaching, is like, yeah, the sets and reps, and like, wearing Under Armour every day and running shoes. Like, yeah, that's good too. Don't get me wrong. But, that part of it is so cool. And I don't think you can, as an individual, come into it with, oh, I'm going to be friendly with all these famous hockey guys and girls. It's more just about like, I'm going to try to like create something. I'm going to try to create something that involves training, that involves a sport of hockey that I get to be a part of. Like, that to me is like, and guys like Matty Nickel, guys like Matt, like, they've done such a good job. Yourself, Kiefer Sherwood is how we got connected. Why? Because, he was so strong in his opinion of you and like what he believed in of you. And I'm just like, well, I know Anthony, but I don't know him. I'm like, I want to go meet him. He's like, really? The fact that I said that to him, now he's on my side too, right? And it's just like his the way that he came across about you is like, I got to meet that guy. Because if he's that important to you, like, I want to meet him because he's doing something right. You know what I mean? And that to me that's such and I just went into a whole diatribe about it, but like, that's giving me chills now. It's like, I don't know how to like express that enough to the young coaches that I'm coming into contact with, because I don't know if it's something that you just have to go through and figure out, maybe.
You know what? I think this is my opinion again. I think our craft should be balanced, teeter-tottered with both the academic portion, but it's got to be an apprenticeship model. You have to learn from coaches. You can't, like, everything that you just said for the last 10 minutes, you can't find that in page 95 in the NSCA textbook. Never. That's relationship building. That's going to places. That's being a part of a team. That's knowing, what not to say in certain instances, what to say. That, to me, should be part and parcel of every single young coach's educational experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how I think I was lucky, my wife, for my 30th birthday, she got me a plane ticket to New Jersey. And I went and hung out with Joe DeFranco and Zach Evanesh, guy that I kind of met online at the time. And I just went in and hung out, worked out, asked them questions. Joe at the time was just like booming, starting his whole like getting bigger and bigger. He's around my age, so we got along really well. Same thing with Zach. I think Zach's a little bit older than me. But he had literally a garage gym, and it was packed every day. So I think having the network of people around you too to kind of help support that. Like, I remember saying to my wife early on, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to open my own gym somehow, some way, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to be a coach, and as soon as I kind of figured out that I could do that, it's I've never looked back. And I have two older brothers. One of them's a forensic detective, police officer. The other one's a firefighter, right? So I thought I would just go down one of those paths, right? And thank God I didn't. I mean, the firefighting thing probably would have been good because they got a good gig, but police, that's the one I was more interested in. And, I thankfully I didn't do that because I just don't know. I don't think that would have gone well. I'm not good at taking instruction, other people tell me what to do. Uh, but again, also the stress of the job, and I work with a lot of police and fire guys now, and it's like, it's pretty scary. Anyways, I just think that like finding that, if you call it passion, I think that's an overused word. I think, you have to be in the people business. You have to really like, helping people. I think that's what I really enjoy about it, is the satisfaction of like, okay, I'm on a phone call list with guys, of really good phone calls when things are like, hey, new baby, I'm getting married, new contract, and I'm on the shit list too, of like, hey, something bad happened, I got hurt, so like I like that, um whatever that is. I don't know what it is, but I like that. I like being a part of people's journey, and being a support network to people. I think that's always been something that I've enjoyed. And I don't know how to, I think Brett Bartholomew does a great job of like, he's went through a lot of that stuff with some of his courses. I think they're great, but I think it's really tough to do that without what you said, like like a true apprenticeship, and just, trying stuff. Like I opened that business, I had no business opening a gym, none. And I like borrowed more money than I'd ever, scared the absolute hell out of me, but it kind of forces you to, you figure it out, and I'm not saying that I figured it out the way that I probably should have, but I was smart enough to know how to network, and get people around me who were way smarter than me, who, business people, and, those types of folks who showed me, and before I opened the gym, I remember one of my buddies who was the head of Under Armour Canada, hence the relationship, he gave me a Business Plan Pro, a CD-ROM.
I have the same one.
Yeah, there you go.
Swear to God, I do.
Yeah, and it took me, I don't know, a year, 14 months of doing it in my basement. I remember waking up Christmas morning, and it's like we didn't have any kids, so whatever, I just go down to the basement, hammer out a few hours of just like trying to figure it out. How do I do it? He'd write me back, and he'd put like red pen all over it. He's like, "Well, you gonna work for 14 hours a day?" I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I can't really do that. He's like, "Do you want to have a family? Do you want to do that?" Like, come on, man. Like, he made me kind of work through it, which again wasn't perfect, but those are things that I think like you have to put yourself out there. And I don't think so many coaches now who are like, "Oh, I know all the textbook stuff," and he's like, but you can't talk to people. I'm so curious now, maybe it's my age. Like we had like I said, a bunch of guest coaches come in the last couple of weeks, and a lot of them are younger, people who I invite that are like, maybe interns of ours, or like, help us with stuff. And they all stand there and they just cross their arms and they don't want to talk to anybody, and it's just like, I walk by them and I rip their arms down, and it's like, go meet people, Like, don't worry about coaching. I'm not going to let you coach anybody, but you can go meet people and build relationships with people. And we had a young coach this summer who just started more full time with us, Jessica. And I know she has the knowledge, but her voice is quiet, and her body language is quiet, and more introverted. And I asked for some feedback from some of the athletes, and they're like, "Oh, we love Jess." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "How could she be better?" And I was like, "Oh, she just needs to like take charge," basically was the feedback. And I went over to Jess and I said, "Hey, look, like I asked some athletes, you're doing great, but like, don't wait for me to like, tell you everything you need to do. Because if I do that, if I come over and tell you to do everything and then you just regurgitate it to the athletes, they're never going to listen to you." I said, like, be willing to do something that wasn't on the game plan, but be smart enough to know where you could kind of fall, where it's not going to affect anybody negatively. So if we're doing a sprint day, could you, if you don't know what to do next, could you fill in the gap with some technical work that isn't going to put the athletes in a bad spot? She's like, "Oh, okay." And after that, I asked for feedback like a couple weeks later, and they're like, "Oh my God, she's this, she's that." I'm like, that is so cool. Like to have someone who's who can put themselves in a place where feedback is wanted and feedback is, valuable enough to like change the action, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Like it's having that ability to be okay with like, it's a tough job. It's a tough job to like get up in front of those people and be confident and be loud enough to be heard and to command people to do things, right? Like if you don't have that, especially with men or males, and they see weakness, like you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. And it doesn't mean you're a tough guy. It doesn't mean it's just command. It's just presence. If you don't have presence, it's going to be tough.
Your coaching voice. Our guest today has been Mark Fitzgerald. Fitzy, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it. Great chat.